I am 72 years old. Marcus and I were dragging heavy, waterlogged wooden pallets out of the old utility shed behind my house on a surprisingly cold Thursday morning when a sudden, violent wave of dizziness forced me to drop my end of the load entirely. The heavy wood slammed against the concrete floor with a loud, echoing crack, kicking up a cloud of old dust and dry leaves. I stumbled backward, pressing my hand flat against the rough aluminum siding of the shed just to keep my balance, while a dark, heavy curtain seemed to pull itself across the edges of my vision. My heart was hammering wildly against my ribs, and a tight, cold pressure was squeezing the base of my neck. Marcus dropped his side of the pallet immediately and rushed over, grabbing my shoulder with a look of pure, unadulterated fear on his face. He is 43 years old. A grown man who deals with complex insurance risk every single day. But in that moment, staring at his father swaying on his feet, he looked like a terrified child. I tried to wave him off, tried to tell him it was just a simple dizzy spell from standing up too fast. But the dull, rhythmic thudding in my ears told a completely different story. I had been following my doctor's advice for months. I had cut out the heavy fried meats I grew up eating. I was eating what I genuinely believed was a disciplined, heart-healthy diet. But leaning against that cold shed, gasping for air, I realized with a sickening drop in my stomach that something I was doing every single day was quietly, systematically, pushing my cardiovascular system to the absolute edge of failure. There are 3 pieces of hard-earned truth I need to lay out for you today, and none of them will be found on the brightly colored packaging at your local grocery store. I need to explain the hidden, highly engineered trap living inside the very vegetables we are told to eat for our hearts. The specific mechanical failure that happens when we overload our blood with industrial preservatives, and the absolute shift in my daily grocery routine that finally allowed my stiff arteries to relax and my dangerous numbers to fall. This is not a medical lecture, and I am not a doctor selling a miracle cure. I am just an older man who almost let a deceptive grocery store label end his life early. You do not want the first real warning to be an emergency, and you certainly do not want to be betrayed by the very habits you thought were saving you. For the first 6 decades of my life, I viewed vegetables the way most people of my generation did. They were the undeniable, universal symbol of good health. Growing up in Columbia, South Carolina, vegetables were the anchor of our dinner table. But as I got older, and as the demands of my career at the Transit Dispatch Center took away my free time, Gloria and I stopped spending hours snapping fresh beans and peeling fresh produce. We turned to convenience, like almost every other working family in this country. When Dr. Evans sat me down in his office, looked at my climbing blood pressure numbers, and told me I needed to drastically increase my vegetable intake and cut out the heavy fats, I did exactly what I thought was right. I started buying canned vegetables by the dozen. Canned string beans, canned diced tomatoes, canned spinach, canned mixed vegetables for soups. I ate them every single day. I thought I was being incredibly disciplined. I suffered through the bland, metallic taste of those daily meals, proudly telling myself that I was actively repairing the damage inside my body. But every time I returned to the pharmacy to use the automated blood pressure machine, the numbers were not dropping. In fact, they were slowly, steadily creeping higher. I was trapped in a paradox that made no logical sense to me. I had subtracted the bad food, I had added the healthy food, and yet my internal machinery was screaming under a heavier load than ever before. I spent most of my working life managing public transportation operations down here in the city, supervising the maintenance and dispatch of our heavy city buses. Because of that environment, I understand how complex mechanical systems react to different types of fluids. Those massive diesel engines rely on a complex network of cooling lines to keep them from overheating. If a young mechanic fills the cooling system with cheap, heavily mineralized tap water instead of purified coolant, a very specific type of disaster begins to unfold. The heavy minerals inside that water do not just flow through the pipes, they stick to the sides. They calcify. They build up a thick, rigid scale on the inner walls of the rubber hoses. Over time, the inside of the pipe gets narrower and narrower, but the water pump is still trying to push the exact same volume of fluid through the system. The pressure inside those lines spikes dangerously high. The pump works twice as hard, the engine runs hot, and eventually, the rigid scaled-up line violently bursts under the unyielding pressure. Our human cardiovascular system responds to industrial sodium in the exact same mechanical way. What I did not understand, and what the brightly colored labels on those cans actively tried to hide from me, is that commercially canned vegetables are not just food. They are food suspended in a heavy, highly concentrated chemical brine designed purely to extend shelf life for years. When I was eating those canned green beans and canned tomatoes every day, I thought I was consuming healthy vitamins. What I was actually doing was flooding my bloodstream with a massive, unmanageable volume of industrial sodium. When you introduce that much sodium into a closed biological system, your body panics. It retains massive amounts of water just to dilute the salt, turning your blood into a thick, heavy, bloated river. Your arteries, reacting to the chemical overload, become stiff and rigid, exactly like those scaled-up cooling lines in the buses. Your heart, which is nothing more than your primary pump, is suddenly forced to slam that heavy, waterlogged blood through a narrow, unyielding space with every single beat. The pressure rarely goes up alone. It goes up with the habits we ignore. I had been ignoring the fact that the very food I thought was medicine was actually the poison scaling up my pipes. I know exactly what happens when an older man falls blindly into the health halo of processed vegetables, because I watched it happen to a man I attended church with for 20 years. Mr. Thomas was a widower who lived alone, a quiet man who took his doctor's advice very seriously. When he was diagnosed with borderline hypertension, he completely cleared out his pantry. He proudly told us after Sunday service that he was eating nothing but vegetable soup for lunch and dinner every day. He bought flats of canned soup from the wholesale store, genuinely believing he had found the perfect, simple solution to his health problems. But his face always carried a strange, puffy, unnatural redness. He complained about a dull, persistent ache at the back of his neck and a heavy, weighted feeling in his legs that made walking up the church steps difficult. He dismissed it as the aches and pains of getting older. One Thursday evening, while sitting in his favorite armchair eating his daily bowl of canned vegetable soup, the scaled-up pressure in his arteries finally broke through a weakened vessel in his brain. He suffered a massive stroke. He survived the hospital stay, but he lost his ability to live independently. He had to move into an assisted living facility, his freedom entirely gone. He did not lose his independence because he was eating recklessly. He lost it because he trusted a commercial system that hid dangerous levels of sodium behind the word vegetable. The reality of that trap did not fully register for me until a few days after my dizzy spell by the shed. My daughter Danielle, who works every day as an assistant to a clinical nutritionist, came over to the house to check on me. I was sitting at the dining room table, feeling defeated, staring at a lunch I had prepared, a slice of plain chicken breast and a large helping of canned spinach. Danielle walked over, picked up the empty tin can from the kitchen counter, and sat down across from me with a serious, unwavering look. She did not raise her voice. She just pulled her reading glasses out of her purse, read the back of the label, and did the math for me. Dr. Evans had told me to keep my total sodium intake under 2,000 milligrams for the entire day. Danielle pointed to the small print and showed me that my single, supposedly healthy serving of canned spinach contained nearly 900 milligrams of sodium. The canned diced tomatoes I used for my dinner sauces contained even more. Before I had even factored in my breakfast or any other meal, I was already completely maxing out the safe capacity of my cardiovascular system, purely from vegetables. The numbers matter, but the patterns behind them matter more. My lifelong pattern was trusting the front of the box instead of reading the reality on the back. I felt a profound sense of betrayal. I realized that the food industry had essentially weaponized my desire to be healthy. They took something grown in the earth, stripped away its natural context, and boiled it in a chemical preservative just so it could sit on a warehouse shelf for 5 years without rotting. And I was the one paying the biological price for their convenience. I decided right then, sitting across from my daughter, that I was no longer going to outsource the structural integrity of my heart to a canning factory. If I wanted to regain control over the pressure inside my chest, I had to completely dismantle the foundation of how I stocked my own pantry. I did not embark on a complicated, expensive gourmet diet. I simply made a hard, non-negotiable rule about how vegetables enter my house. Gloria and I spent that entire Saturday afternoon going through our cupboards, pulling out every single can of vegetables, beans, and tomato sauce that listed sodium as a preservative. We packed them all into heavy cardboard boxes and donated them to a local food drive, refusing to keep the trap inside our home. Then, I changed my grocery routine entirely. I stopped walking down the center aisles of the store, where the heavily processed, shelf-stable foods live. I started buying bags of frozen vegetables instead. Flash frozen green beans, frozen broccoli, frozen spinach. The freezing process is the preservative, meaning they do not need to be drowned in an industrial salt bath to survive. They are as close to fresh as you can get, without the massive sodium load. For the items I absolutely could not find frozen, like certain types of beans for our southern stews, I developed a strict mechanical protocol in the kitchen. I never ever open a can and dump the contents directly into a pot anymore. I open the can, pour the contents into a fine metal colander, and run them under cold, heavy tap water for 2 full minutes. I physically wash the sticky, heavy sodium brine off the food before it ever has a chance to enter my biological system. It adds exactly 2 minutes to the cooking process, but those 2 minutes are the manual bleed valve that protects my arteries from scaling up. I started taking absolute, uncompromising responsibility for every single milligram of pressure I allowed into my body. A steady life builds a steadier body, and my kitchen became the primary workshop where that stability was maintained. The physical change did not happen overnight. The human body is a heavy machine. It takes time to flush out the scaled-up debris of decades of bad habits. But slowly, over the next 2 months, the heavy, sluggish fog that I used to wake up with began to lift. The tight, uncomfortable pressure I felt behind my ribs when I exerted myself completely faded away. The swelling in my ankles, a swelling I had completely normalized as just another part of getting older, disappeared entirely. I was no longer carrying a massive, heavy payload of retained water. My heart did not have to pound desperately just to circulate my blood. The engine was finally running with clean, unburdened fluid. When Marcus came over a few months later to help me finish clearing out that old utility shed, the difference was undeniable. It was another heavy, humid Carolina afternoon. We lifted the remaining pallets, we carried heavy boxes of rusted tools, and we worked for 3 solid hours. I did not experience a single moment of dizziness. My vision stayed clear. My breathing was deep and steady, completely free of that terrifying tightness that had dropped me to my knees earlier in the year. Marcus leaned against the shed when we were done, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and looked at me with a quiet, profound respect. He told me I was moving better than men 10 years younger than me. I told him the truth. I told him I had finally stopped trying to fix a mechanical problem with poisoned parts. Marcus is a man who measures risk for a living, constantly looking for the hidden liabilities in a contract. I saw him realize that day that he needed to start looking for the hidden liabilities in his own pantry. Most people wait for a scare before they change. I had my scare by the shed, and I was making sure my son understood the lesson so he would never have to experience his own. Control begins with what you stop normalizing. I stopped normalizing the idea that convenience was worth the price of my own vascular flexibility. When I sat on the crisp medical paper in Dr. Evans' examination room for my 6-month follow-up, the atmosphere was entirely different. I did not feel the cold, suffocating dread of a man waiting for a judge to hand down a sentence. The automated gray cuff squeezed my arm, the machine whirred its familiar mechanical tune, and the final numbers flashed on the digital screen. 126/79. Dr. Evans stared at the monitor, checked the calibration of the machine, and then looked at me with a wide, genuine smile. He told me that my numbers had not just improved. They had stabilized at the level of a healthy man in his 50s. He asked me what complicated diet I had finally surrendered to. I just smiled back at him. I did not tell him about the transit dispatch center, or the scaled-up cooling lines, or the heavy boxes of canned goods we gave away. I just told him I finally learned how to read the fine print of my own life. I learned how to stop flooding the engine. I am not cured, and I do not pretend that I can live forever. Managing blood pressure is a lifelong daily commitment, a quiet contract you sign with your own biology every single morning. The threat is always there, waiting patiently for you to drop your guard and return to the comfortable, destructive habits of the past. But the sheer paralyzing terror of being out of control is gone. I do not view my body as a runaway train anymore. When I walk through the grocery store now, steering my cart past the towering walls of brightly colored cans promising health and vitality, I do not feel tempted. I just feel a deep, quiet sense of clarity. I know exactly what is inside those cans, and I know exactly what it costs to consume them. Life moves forward, steadily and quietly. Gloria and I eat well. We eat food that actually sustains us, and my heart beats with a calm, unburdened rhythm. The road ahead of us does not have to be a blind march toward an inevitable mechanical failure. It simply requires us to open our eyes, take our hands off the autopilot, and do the unglamorous daily work of protecting the only engine we will ever have.